Karmelo Anthony was just sentenced to 35 years in prison for the murder of Austin Metcalf in a terrible, horrible tragedy that happened in Frisco, Texas a couple years back. And of course, social media is on fire right now, debating, was it justified? Did the courts get it right? If the shoe was on the other foot, right? If Carmelo was white and Austin Metcalf was black, would the verdict be the same? Now, before we go any deeper, y'all know this is the unleavened truth. I am all about the truth. Okay, just like we don't protect powerful people when they're in the wrong just because we voted for them. Okay, we don't protect guilty people just because they may happen to look like us. And this is a standard that we have set at this channel from day one. Okay. It don't matter who you are, it don't matter what you look like. All we care about is the truth. And we're applying that same standard here. I think the courts got it right. Now, before we talk about Texas law or the media coverage that was present during the trial, I think we need to take a step back and just talk about the facts of the case. Because again, the evidence, the eyewitness testimony, they all agree here. And I think if people just knew what was being said and heard during the trial, there wouldn't be so much of this debate online about the verdict. So let's just walk through the facts, okay, step by step. Number one, Karmelo Anthony walked under the tent of Memorial High School uninvited. He did not go to Memorial High School. Number two, the people asked who he was. He refused to comply. He refused to answer. He just remained seated under the opposing team's tent. Austin Metcalf, who was a team captain, he was a senior in high school, approached Carmelo and basically asked him to leave. All the eyewitnesses say at first, Austin Metcalf was calm in his approach to Carmelo. Karmelo Anthony refused to leave the tent. After being asked again to leave, Carmelo refused. Okay. His response was some sort of, if you want me to leave, you're going to have to make me leave. From there, the confrontation escalated. Carmelo then puts his hand in his bag and says some form of, touch me and see what happens. Austin called his bluff. He put his hands on Carmelo. Some students say he touched Carmelo. Some people say he pushed Carmelo. Some people say he shoved Carmelo. None of them say that he swung or punched Carmelo. It's also important to note that nobody saw a weapon up to this point. A lot of people even said they didn't even notice that Austin had been stabbed until he lifts up his shirt after the incident. But Austin puts his hands on Carmelo. Carmelo immediately pulls his hand out of his bag, stabs Austin in the chest with the knife. Carmelo flees. About 6 minutes later, the police apprehend him to where Carmelo says, "This is not alleged. I did it." Now, this is where the first failure of the judge, in my opinion, by not allowing cameras in the courtroom, this is where the first failure takes place. Because in the courtroom, again, we see 100% of the students that testified, both for the prosecution and the defense, all testifying to the same key details of the case.
Some of the students, some of the teammates of Austin Metcalf who were there under this tent, there was like 5 or 6 of them who spoke. And there were some common themes to what they said. These are state witnesses brought by the prosecution. What were some of the things that stood out to you just on their account of what they saw that day?
Well, Chris, one of the main commonalities, the common denominators between them all is what you just pointed out, the speed at which it happened. All of them said that they didn't even realize what had happened because it had happened so fast. I mean, including Austin Metcalf himself. They said when the stabbing happened, they said they looked at Austin and he was just stumbling back and he just, was doing, a motion like this. And then he pulled his shirt up and that's when they saw the gaping wound. But not one of them said they even saw a knife. So that was one thing, Chris. The biggest commonality between them all is that they all said Carmelo was the aggressor. They all said they were sitting under the tent and he walks up and just sits under there. Didn't say anything really to anybody. One person said that he shook hands with another teenager there, but even when he did that, he just sat down and wasn't talking to anyone. Didn't ask, hey, can I sit here? Hey, what's going on? And of course, they kept diving into the tent culture, at track meets where each tent is pretty much alluded to as a locker room for each team, and you wouldn't hang out in the opposing team's locker room. And they also said their coaches didn't really allow it. If the coaches saw somebody from the opposing team, like Carmelo was from Centennial High School, sitting under the Memorial High School tent, that just would not have been allowed. All of them said that Austin started off calmly. Hey man, what's going on? You shouldn't really be here. Just get off from under the tent. Not in any aggressive way. Everything was calm. And they said Carmelo was just like not responding, just saying no, or if you want me to move, you're gonna have to make me move. Just, being real adamant about not leaving the tent. The students did admit that Austin started getting a little heated. Carmelo started getting a little heated, but then they started talking about Carmelo's hand in the bag. And then that all of them said that same thing that we've heard, Chris, the phrase, touch me and find out, touch me and you see what happens. And another thing they all said, Chris, was that it was a little bit of a commotion, but they all said they did not even expect a fight to happen. One girl testified, and she was at the tent next to it at Liberty High School, maybe 20, 30 feet away. She heard the argument going on, but she thought it was just boys being boys, and she went to go watch the 3,200 race. And by the time she walked down to the fence, Austin was stabbed. And, the prosecutor asked her, if you're a teenager, if you expected a fight, teenagers are going to pull their phones out. We've seen fights before in high school. It's like watching a wrestling match. You're not going to turn away from that. But everyone seemed to turn away. People were on their phones scrolling TikTok, scrolling Instagram, not really concerned with what was happening. They heard it happening, but it wasn't to the point where they thought this would be the result here.
So clearly this is not a divided courtroom. Okay, this is a unanimous stance from all the parties involved on both sides, prosecution and the defense. And again, if the mainstream, if us common folk just had access to this information from cameras being allowed to be in the courtroom, we wouldn't be debating this on social media right now. So now that we've got a baseline of facts for what was presented during the trial, let's examine Karmelo Anthony's argument, okay, which is he acted in self-defense. Now, in Texas, you absolutely have the right to do that, right? But there's 3 provisions that the defense has to overcome to make a self-defense claim stick.
Someone. And what he's talking about is Texas law. Texas has a very specific law when it comes to self-defense and provocation. Let me put it up on the screen for you. The statute, Texas Penal Code, section 9.31 B4. The use of force against another is not justified if the actor provoked the other's use or attempted use of unlawful force. Okay? You provoke what happened, you don't get to claim self-defense. That's the purpose of this. Now, the language in the statute is very plain. So there's been cases and litigation and decisions made by courts in Texas. And basically they've broken down to 3 parts of this provocation. Now, it's up to prosecutors. They have the burden of proof. You want to disprove self-defense, which is what they need to do here. You need to disprove self-defense. They can do that by proving provocation by Karmelo Anthony. Here's what they would need to show. That the act or words of Karmelo Anthony provoked the attack. The act or words were for the purpose of a pretext for doing harm. That the act or words can be reasonably calculated to provoke the attack. So what are we talking about here? That what Karmelo Anthony is saying and doing under that tent is to provoke Austin Metcalf to attack him. Okay? That's what prosecutors need to prove.
So there's only 3 things that the prosecutor had to prove under the statute. So let's just examine all 3. Number 1, did Carmelo provoke the attack? He sat under the other team's tent, which if you have played any sport, okay, track, football, basketball, doesn't matter. Each team has their own locker room, okay? At a track meet, your tent is the locker room. So he sits under the other team's tent. He's asked to leave by that team. He refuses to leave. And then he makes the threat, touch me and see what happens. I would say that constitutes provocation. If you were trying to avoid the conflict, you would leave. Number 2, did Carmelo provoke Austin for the sake of doing harm? Well, he brought a knife to a track meet. Okay? There's no justification for bringing a weapon to a track meet. Here in Chicago area, in the last 10 years, there's been 1 incidence of violence at a track facility. It was an unsupervised track event that happened in August of 2024. Okay? Not even during track season. All right. So there is no argument for why Carmelo would feel the need to have a knife at a track meet. Not only does he have the knife, but he has his hand in his bag before Austin touches him. Okay. So when Austin does finally touch him, uh, Carmelo's not surprised by what happens. He's prepared for it. That argues premeditation. And number three, could his words and actions reasonably provoke an attack? If I have my hands in my bag and I say, touch me and see what happens, I would I would consider that reasonable cause to provoke an attack. All the eyewitnesses said, hey, that sounds like a challenge. Austin thought it was a challenge, which is why he proceeds to put his hands on Carmelo. The argument here is, did Carmelo create a scenario which provoked an attack? And according to all the student testimony and the camera evidence, the answer is yes, he did. And this is the most important part here because Texas law is very clear on this when it comes to self defense. You cannot engineer an attack or a confrontation, and then when the confrontation goes exactly how you engineer it, you can't then claim self defense. And again, this brings me back to my original point. Okay. The reason we're having this debate to begin with is because we, as the public, were left in the dark. Okay. The judge made this decision to not allow cameras in the courtroom for such a polarizing case. We know how cases that involve opposing races are portrayed in this country. Okay. Any chance you get to provide transparency so that we don't start another race war in this country, we should take it. All right. So when I was doing my research and trying to gather all the evidence of the case here, I came across this channel called Court TV. And this guy who's a former prosecutor, I think his name is Vinny. All right. He dives into why this is such a big mistake.
Now, here's the problem for us. Not a problem for the jury, but the problem for us in trying to figure out whether or not this provocation took place, whether or not it was Karmelo Anthony provoking this confrontation underneath the tent, because there's no cameras in the courtroom, which to me is I mean, I could do a whole nother episode just on this issue. When you have a case like this that divides the community and there's going to be a verdict and there's going to be a reaction to that verdict, right? And people didn't get to actually see the trial, it lessens the trust in the system. So the judge in this case, in keeping cameras out, has done a disservice to the public that the judge serves in Texas and around the world, because it's much more difficult to trust a verdict if you don't see the evidence.
So again, this is a former prosecutor that is saying these things, okay? He's not a conspiracy theorist, okay? He's not a Republican or a Democrat running for office, okay? This is a guy who spent his career prosecuting criminals. And he's saying, hey, we should have transparency here. If you're the defense, you should want transparency, right? If Carmelo's going to go down for this, you would at least want the support of the public by being able to show the public what happened in the courtroom. And this is why I decided to do a video on this, because again, here at Unleavened Truth, that's what we're about. We get so caught up in the gray, right? Oh, if this was a white kid who stabbed a black kid, would it be different? That's not the debate here. The debate here is this vacuum of information, right? Missing context that we have. And instead of that vacuum being filled with facts and figures, right, and evidence, the vacuum is filled with media spin, with narratives, with propaganda. Again, anybody who is reasonable, in my opinion, could look at the same information I just looked at, look at all the eyewitness testimony. We have body cam footage of the arrest. We have camera footage of the actual incident. Okay. Like, we don't have it personally, but the courts had access to this. And it only took the jury 3 hours to come up with a verdict, a unanimous verdict that Carmelo Anthony was guilty. So what are we debating about other than the opinion of what happened versus the facts of what happened? And for me, here's where I kind of land on this, and I'll leave you guys with this here. This might seem random, but I wonder, What's Carmelo Anthony's Spotify look like? What kind of music does this kid listen to? Because one thing that I've been extremely critical of is in our culture, in black culture, right? Whatever. You want to label me a black person. I hate the label, but I understand it. We have a culture, we have a community. In our culture, it is undeniable that we have a desire or at least a tolerance for celebrating violence. Okay. I know in my personal life, when I was a young teen, 18, 19 years old, you know, prior to going to college, basically, I was listening to Wayne and Gucci and Jeezy and all these guys that talk about the drug game, talk about the gun game, talk about violence, right? And it shaped how I acted. It shaped how I talked to people. It shaped how I dressed, having my pants halfway down my ankles, right? As I got older, I started listening to more J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar and old Drake and all these other, Lupe Fiasco, all the intellectual rappers, Kanye West, Jay-Z, right? I started to think different. I started to act different. I started to dress different. Suddenly, my pants fit and they were around my waist like they're supposed to be. So, in my experience, the correlation between what we feed our minds and how we behave is undeniable. There's no arguing it. So I'm curious, what was Carmelo like? What did he listen to? What were his interests? What made him feel the same everlasting, ever-present fear and anger that all these young black men feel that makes them think they need weapons to protect themselves or to justify their masculinity? If we're being honest about it, 2 kids lost their lives that day in Frisco, okay? Austin Metcalf is no longer with us, right? And Carmelo Anthony is another young black man who will spend the next 20 plus years in prison, okay? All because of something that could have been avoided just by having a little more emotional maturity, right? Maybe having a better environment around him. Maybe could have prevented this. So let me know what y'all think, man. I just hope that we can continue to live more in truth, live more in the black and white, no pun intended. Live more in the objective and live less in the emotional. Okay. The best way for us to heal as a culture, as a community, as a society is to just be honest. So let me know what y'all think in the comments, man. If this video brings you value, please like, subscribe. I want to hear from you, good, bad, indifferent. Let's talk about it. Till next time.